This is my presentation on the year-long final. So for my theme of my driving question that I kind of created, I said, how does fear affect the actions of both the murderer or the murderers and the victims? Fear being the impulse and the knowing of death or guilt. Actions would be the decisions or the plans of the parties in the book. The murderers would be the characters committing the crimes, and the victims would be the people witnessing or being killed by the murderers in the book. So I'm going to go a little bit in depth of the authors before I introduce each of my books. Dave Cullen was the author of Columbine, which was my first nonfiction piece. He was very passionate about journalism. He started it in high school, and he continued with that all his life. He spent 10 years researching his book, which he went through so many interviews, and he talked with the law, and he was always on the scene of what was going on, and he was always up to date. And for that, he became the nation's foremost authority on the Columbine killers. Truman Capote was the author of In Cold Blood, which was my second nonfiction piece. He is a short story writer and a screenwriter and a playwright, etc. He spent only 6 years researching, but that's still a great amount of time for the effort that he put into his book. And he calls this book a nonfiction novel, which is the first of its kind, and it basically means that all of the events in the book are true. And it's all true, it all means what exactly it says, but he doesn't put any of his own thoughts into the book, and he kind of exaggerates some of the events that happened. And at least 20 films and TV productions have been produced from his work, including Breakfast at Tiffany's. Agatha Christie is my third writer, and the writer of the fiction piece, And Then There Were None. She's an English writer, and she mainly writes mystery novels. She is the world's best-selling author, only to be outsold by Shakespeare and the Bible, and she has the most sold mystery books and novels of all time. So for context and summary, I'm going to start with Columbine. Columbine is about Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris. They, for years, have devised a plan to kill people in their high school. They had specific tapes that they had filmed themselves shooting and practicing with guns and devising their plans, and eventually they had planned on April 20th of 1999 to go into the school with a bomb and blow up the school. When people came out, they would shoot and kill as many people as they could before they were caught by law enforcement. Unfortunately, the bombs did not happen, so they just went straight in for the school, and they ended up killing 13 people and injuring 23. The other half of the book is just kind of victim interviews and the aftermath and the trials and how people are dealing with the event. This book was published March 3rd, 2009 by 12, exactly 10 years after the massacre had happened. In Cold Blood, about that would be Dick Hickok and Perry Smith are the murderers in this book, and they kill a family of 4 called the Clutter family in Holcomb, Kansas. Their motive is they believe that there are things in the house that are valuable to them, even though they only find $50 and a few other things in the safe. They work as a team because Perry Smith can do the murdering, but he has no drive to, but Dick Hickok has the drive because of his unfortunate childhood with parent abuse and not really good education. This book was originally published in 1965 in the New York Times, and it was republished in February 1st in 1994 by Vintage. The other half of the book is them running away, but eventually coming back to be killed by corporal punishment because of they got caught for the crimes that they committed. And Then There Were None is about 10 people who anonymously get a letter from someone they don't know to come to a dinner party on an island. They eat this dinner, and they keep singing this poem around the mansion that they are in, about 10 little soldier boys, and how each stanza is how one of them keeps getting killed off. And we eventually see that each character is being killed off according to the poem, and nobody knows who is killing these people, even though they have the idea, until the very end of the epilogue, that we find out that the 6th person who should have been shot, that we had believed this whole time, was actually the murderer. And we find that out in a message in a bottle, where that he had committed suicide after he was content with the murderers that he killed, because they had committed crimes that they had not gone down for, and he, being a justice, did not like that. This book was published in 1939 because Agatha Christie's husband had gone off to World War II, and she had motivation to write a book, and it had gone through 3 title alterations. So to go a little bit more in depth about Columbine, The ethos is very credible. The author had been a journalist for a long time, and he spent 10 years on the book, and it was very informative, so you could tell that he had put all this effort into the book. The pathos would be the victim interviews and the quotes that he took directly from the victims, one being Brian had accepted Danny's fate. I knew that he was gone, he said. That came directly from a victim of the shooting. There's a lot of alliteration in the book. It was used to emphasize events. The tone was very emotional yet informative, and that was because the purpose of the book was to inform people of the event and open up their eyes to the tragedy that happened and to never forget it. In Cold Blood, ethos was the author is known for crime books. So we can infer that this book is just as good as all the other ones. Plus, he also spent 6 years working on it, so you could see that all of the credibility in it would be the excuse me, the quotes that he had from the murderers, and he spent time meeting with the murderers themselves, and other murderers should get an insight on what murderers think about. Pathos would be using quotes directly from the murderers, as I said. He uses imagery as details of the characters, and this is to paint scenes. It paints a mental picture of the scenes that are happening. He goes in depth about their stature, their height, what they look like, and the environments that they're around. And the purpose was this was a literary experiment, as I said earlier, as if this was being the first nonfiction novel of its time. And then there were none. The ethos was that Agatha Christie had many successful mystery books, and she had sold the most books of all time except for 2 other people. So the pathos would be to learn the background and the story of each of the characters. So in the first section of the book, we just see the characters coming to the island in different cars and them reading the letter for each character, and we learn their backstory, and we kind of get connected to the characters. And at dinner they kind of share all of their stories, especially when things are starting to get creepy and the unknown killer, as they don't know yet, is giving them hints as to what they've done wrong before the murderers begin to happen. So the point of view for this is third person omniscient. There's a lot of allegory referencing to the poem. Imagery is limited yet powerful. As one of my quotes says, a bigger chopper, a heavy affair, was leaning against the door. The metal is stained a dull brown. It corresponded only too well with the deep wound in the back of Roger's head. Christie kind of does this so she doesn't give away too much detail of event that happened, but your brain can put 2 and 2 together and say that this person was murdered with an axe, and it kind of gives you a little bit of leeway to imagine as such, and you can kind of see the image in your head, but she doesn't give you all of the detail. And the purpose was, this book had a difficult plot, and Agatha Christie wanted to take it on and see if she can execute it correctly, in which she did. So I created a Venn diagram to kind of find the similarities of Columbine, In Cold Blood, and then there were none. So In Cold Blood and Then There Were None, they both had similarities because both were targeting a specific group. So In Cold Blood targeted the Clutter family, and Then There Were None targeted the 10 people that Justice Wargrave had invited to the mansion. And they were both written as a literary experiment, In Cold Blood being the first nonfiction novel, and Then There Were None being written because of the difficult plot. And then there were none in Columbine similarities. They both were strategically planned by Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris in Columbine, and by Justice Wargrave and Then There Were None. And both of the murderers committed suicide at the end. In Columbine, the murderers killed themselves in the school, and Then There Were None, Justice Wargrave had committed suicide, as we find out in the very end of the book. Columbine and In Cold Blood similarities, both had 2 different murderers. In Columbine, it was Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris. And in Cold Blood, it was Dick Haycock and Perry Smith. And both of the books required immense research by the authors, one being for 10 years of research and one being for 6. And for all 3 books, multiple people were murdered at the end, whether it be themselves or the people that they were shooting. All of the murderers and all 3 of the books were dead by the end, whether it be by electric chair, lethal injection, or suicide. And the murder weapon was a gun at some point in the book. In Columbine, it was a gun used to kill the people inside of the school. And in Cold Blood, it was a gun used to kill the Clutter family. And then there were none. There was a gun used to commit suicide by Justice Wargrave.
This is my visual. I made a gun out of cardboard, duct tape, and paper towel rolls. It represents the major events in all three of my books, which being the Columbine shooting, the massacre of the Clutter family, and the suicide of Justice Wargrave that we see in the epilogue. The gun opens up, and inside you would find 2 bullets to load both of the barrels. This bullet represents all of the different themes in the book and how we put that in, and all of the books are different, being the motives and the events that happen, and this bullet represents the common theme, which would be fear, whether it be the guilt of doing wrong, the plans going wrong, or the inevitable death or fear of being caught.
So for my driving question and my theme answered, I said fear can affect the actions of both the murderers and victims, whether it be because plans going awry, guilt, or inevitable death.